Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on the channel. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and welcome to another author interview for the month of August. Now, my guest today is a first timer here on the channel, and quite possibly my first author to present their story, which is a Western, which is a first on the channel. As many as you know, we always have fantasy and sci-fi, so it's a nice change of pace to have a different genre. Now, my guest lives in Northern California with his wife and two daughters. He has been a fan of storytelling and writing since elementary school. It was always a passion to be creative and share his passions with the world. After working on a few short stories and a few Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, Mike has tried out his craft in a romance novel, Whiskey Glasses, which is his debut novel that he self published and truly looks forward to expanding the characters that he has created. He enjoys creating characters that the readers can identify with while falling in love with at the same time. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest of today, Mr. Jesse Dean. Jesse, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. This
No
is awesome.
problem, Jesse. So, before we dive into your novel, Whiskey Glasses, is there anything else you'd like to share about your background?
Sure. So like you said, with the writing, even though this is my first debut novel as a Western romance, I do have a couple short stories out in the Kindle universe. I am currently also working on some fantasy novels, but as I set up for this project, which is a 4-book series at this time, the intent was to finish this series to keep the marketing and the branding kind of going at the right pace. And then
Hmm.
hopefully once this series is done, then I can focus on my fantasy romance stuff while also dabbling in other types of genres of writing.
Nice. So let's actually talk a little bit about your writing in particular. Now, in your bio that you sent me, that you've been writing for a long time since elementary school, and sort of like storytelling and creating amazing characters has been with you from the beginning. Now, what was sort of the aha moment for you that you decided to make the commitment to write your debut novel, as also writing your short stories as well?
It actually happened on a camping trip. I have two daughters and then I have three nieces. We were out camping with my brother and his family, and we were sitting around the campfire, and the girls just looked kind of bored. So I decided I was going to make up a story for them, pulling some inspiration from Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends. I came up with a story about a Princess Peanut Butter and a Prince Jelly and how they came together to make the perfect sandwich. And then they wanted another story, so I made up a Sasquatch story, which I intended to scare them with, but it just ended up being silly and fun. And so campfire stories kind of became my thing when we would go camping. And then I started telling them stories like The Labyrinth and
Ooh, okay.
Neverending Story and The Princess Bride, which they then would go home and watch the movies. And so it was exposing them to that fantasy realm. And then what gave me my ultimate push to decide to publish was during COVID, the COVID pandemic.
Hmm.
I was sent on furlough from work, and I was at home and I was kind of bored. So I was like, well, maybe I should start writing. I was At the time I was an after school teacher for
Right.
after school programs, so I was writing curriculum. So the writing process was really strong. I had written some scripts for theater. I did an Alice in Wonderland play, and I wrote my own version of it. And so I decided I wanted to write a story for kids. And so I wrote this little short story for my daughters. It's also on Amazon. It's called The Adventures of Hobby and Wally. It's about two
All
guinea
right.
pigs who go into Neverland. And then I wrote my short stories, and we started playing Dungeons and Dragons more. And so all my short story characters are based off of my quest members, my family.
Nice.
So that
So
was that was the launch.
nice. Very cool. Now, what can you tell us of Whiskey Glasses being a Western romance story? What can you give us a little teaser of what we can expect from your story?
So, Whiskey Glasses is actually a collaboration with of ideas between my wife's love for romance novels, her love of Western. She's an equestrian writer.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
so it's been in ever since I've been with my wife. I've really been immersed in the Western culture. Lots of country music, lots of line dancing that happens in this household. Um, and so she's really big into romance. She's a big bookstagrammer, and we were talking about ideas, and I said, what if I wrote this book about these type of characters, this strong cowboy who is kind of a salt of the earth kind of guy, give you the shirt off his back, and this librarian who kind of embodies kind of like a Belle from Beauty and the Beast
Ooh,
personification, where
okay.
she's adventurous. She wants a little bit something different than what she's used to. She's strong. She's kind of know what she wants. She's direct, but each character comes with a little bit of past trauma.
Mm,
So
okay.
I have my degree in psychology, so I really like to figure out people. I really like to write about different types of people and try to make characters that stand out that people can identify with. So, Jameson, who's the male main character, and Abigail, who's the female main character, just have chance meetups, and they just slowly just kind of start to like each other. He's big and strong and quiet, and she's small and adventurous and determined. And he has a best friend, Cal, who is turning out to be a fan favorite. A lot of people like Cal. He's kind of the California surfer boy kind of attitude.
All right.
Um, and he's new to town. He's only been there for a couple of years, but he's best friends with Jameson. He helps him on the ranch. And so that's what the story is. A story about two young people just kind of meeting, falling in love, learning how to lean on each other and help each other through past traumas. And so it's really
Nice.
more about, I call it a small town romance
Mm,
because that's what the series is about not just whiskey glasses, just Jameson and Abigail. It's about the characters that come through the town and how they develop over the series.
okay. Now, would you say that Whiskey Glasses is like a modern Western and takes place in modern times, or is it set in the Old West?
It's definitely modern. So, there's reference to current, more current events. It's modern.
All right. Okay. So now let's actually talk the creation of the story. So when you began writing this out, penning it out, the first draft, did you have any goals in mind with Whiskey Glasses? And also, for this blend of Western and romance, did you have any needs you want to satisfy for fans of both genres?
Um, the goal when writing it, kind of what I said earlier, was about creating characters that were real, right?
Mm.
Like like I said, my wife's a big romance reader. Like, and I read some of them with her. They're fun. They're fun reads. They're fun to kind of burn through. Um, and but it's always this unrealistic person,
Right.
these unrealistic expectations. So, it's a joke. It's all over Instagram. It's the book boyfriends. Good luck, husbands,
Yes.
keeping up with the book boyfriends. Well, you know what? I tell the book boyfriends they can shove off because I'm I'm there. I'm the one here, and um, I make sure that my characters, when I write them, have a little bit more reality to them. They might
Mm,
be
okay.
they might have a little bit more. I create this aesthetic of them. He's handsome, he's big, he's strong, he's got problems.
Hmm.
He's not perfect. She has problems. She's not perfect. She's cute, she's pretty, she, is a little wild, she's a little wild at times, and he kind of likes that. But they work together, and I think that's what I'm aiming for. That's the goal, is to to make real relationships where people can read these characters and be like, oh, I understand that. I've gone through that. And I think it connects their emotions better to the story. Instead of just being like, oh, they have this fictitious romance and it's almost
Ah, I
impossible and
see.
it's never going to
I see.
happen. And I want it to be real. I want people to feel when they read my stories. And I know that's people read books to escape reality at times, but some people also I feel people read to like normalize themselves at the same time.
That makes sense.
Um,
That makes sense.
what was the second part of that? I'm sorry. What
The
was
second part was like the need to satisfy, or what was the need to satisfy for, readers of both Western stories and romance stories, or was there a need to satisfy for fans of both those genres?
there is I don't the story, even though it takes place in a Western setting, um, Cody, Wyoming, where the book is set, is actually kind of like home of like Buffalo Bill. You
Right.
know, there's a ton of Western lore that surrounds Wyoming. Cody, Wyoming, it's right on the border of like Montana. It's just right outside Montana. So that 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 niche market of like the Yellowstone kind of cowboy, those cattle ranchers, that's what it kind of focuses on, is that type of character in small town. But the romance kind of Western was more about meeting um, selfishly my wife's needs, writing a book that she would like. And if it's a book that I felt like she would like, then I'm writing for her. And
Ah, okay.
then I can gather a market based off her response. But in the end, I'm writing the book for me and I'm writing the book for her. And if it's great and it does something amazing, then that's awesome. That's just bonus. But I truly wanted to write something that meant something for us, um, and was more personal that way.
Okay. So now let's actually jump ahead a bit. So now after the first draft, you worked on the second draft, and the third draft, you found a cover artist, you found an editor for the book, so you have it already there. And I don't know if you've done beta reads or arc reads for your book before you self-published it, but what was the initial reaction like from friends and family? Were they positive? Were they mixed? And did their responses in a way validate your goals that you set out from the beginning and from what you mentioned before?
Uh, so so for whiskey glasses, I just did arc readers.
Okay.
I wrote the book. I work with a friend who is a ghostwriter, and she's kind of starting her editing career as well. And so it's like, I've got a book if you wouldn't mind just kind of looking at it. I know I'm not the best at grammar. I know that, I depend very heavily on Microsoft Word and to correct a lot of those mistakes. And I know I missed stuff, but she was like, yeah, she would love to read it. So she and my wife, who are listed as the editors, um, Holly Llewellyn and my wife Jamie Dean, they are listed as the editors because they're the ones that did the primary editing for it.
Right.
Um, they had it, and both their responses were they loved it, and then they were recommending it to other people and other friends. And one of the biggest, so kind of sticking on that track, sorry. So after they edited it, I signed up for ARC. I had people sign up for ARCs. I didn't know about beta reading at the time. It was all still
Mhm.
pretty new to me. The Instagram world was still new. I
Same.
haven't really been on social media a lot. So Bookstagram was completely just what my wife was doing for her books. I didn't realize it was so much of an author promotion that I'm using it for now.
Right.
So I got some ARC readers and sent out, and I had uh, a handful of people, probably about 8 or 9 people, who just told me they just loved it and they just went with it. And I've talked to other writers. I had many people who didn't even respond. Didn't Who knows if they read the book, if they liked it or not, but they didn't take the time to review it or answer or email me. So I don't know. But the people who did read it, really good responses. I've got a lot of new followers to my genre and my page. I've got a couple street team members now that I'm building for these next projects who I'm completely out of their consistent style. Like I have a
Right.
couple of my team members who are like, it's all dark. Their pages are dark. It's goth. It's,
Hmm.
you know, dark romance. It's heavy smut. And then you see this bright blue book pop up on their reels. And I'm just like, I stick out like a sore thumb and I love it.
Awesome. I completely understand. I know the feeling. Like I am doing arcs for my third book, and it's an entirely, new experience. I've never done that for my other two books, but it is really, really nice to get, other people's perspective on, a project that you've worked on for a long time, which actually now let's turn to that. So just as you said, you began working on this during the pandemic, which a lot of authors on the show have said that's when they began really writing and really coming back to holding their craft as a writer, because it's not easy. It's not easy writing a book. It's like years and years, if not decades, crafting just the first draft, and then hours and hours of editing, revising, finding a cover artist whose style matches the type of story you want to tell, not to mention the editor who edits the story to the point that you agree that this is the best version. And then ultimately presenting it on the digital stage, there is a sense of anxiety for, traditional published or self-published, that voice in the back that says, you're not good enough, this is not, professional, no one's going to read this kind of story. It's a little intimidating for authors. So for you, Jesse, in your own opinion and your own experience, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome or self-doubt and anxiety? And if not, what has continued to motivate you, or rather discipline you, to continue writing, to continue sharing this story? Because in your opinion, this story, Whiskey Glasses, needs to be shared with others.
So, yes, suffer from imposter syndrome, anxiety disorders, and uh, panic attacks almost on a daily basis. One of the things that drives me for it is there's which actually helps with the anxiety and the panic is if I don't get it out of my head, then it's going to be there. I need to get it out somehow. So if I'm writing these stories and like trust me, I have tabled tons of stories. I would have a notepad full of stuff. I have a Google Doc full of stories.
Same.
Certain books that I've gotten like 5,000, 10,000 words in, and then I'm like, okay, we'll come back to that later and see what happens. But for the most part, for me, the drive is um, I want to feel like I've accomplished something
Mm.
greater than what I've accomplished so far. And back when, back before Amazon was doing all this, I'm 40 years old, so I remember the birth of Amazon. I've been around long enough for that. And I remember the idea of like publishing a book was like crazy. Like you had to get in with a publishing company, you had to be approved, you had to go through all these steps just to be a publisher. And back in high school, when I was doing creative writing classes, like that seemed like such an impossible thing. It seems so
Yeah.
big. Um, I come from a family of performers and singers and actors and stage people, and knowing the probability of getting to into something like that, the chances being so slim. So there's that reality. So I never really considered myself being a published writer or an indie writer or an indie author or however you want to
Right.
call it. It was always just kind of something to do. And so when I did start it, it was just, well, I'm just going to write it. And the original intent of writing and what we were trying to do at the time, it was just trying to keep ourselves busy. I have two young daughters, and the idea was that I was going to write the guinea pig story, Hobby and Wally, and she was going to read it on her YouTube channel. And we were going to
Okay.
make this a series. We were going to make this a thing. And so we did a couple test runs with her reading like Alice in Wonderland on YouTube. And then it just kind of took its own life and became something else. And so my story never really got involved into it. It's morphed into something completely different that has nothing to do with books anymore.
Okay.
Um, but it was just to keep ourselves busy. And that's when the writing became more of a hobby of mine, less of like, oh, what do I want to do right now? Oh, I want to go sit on the Xbox and play video games, or oh, I want to go watch a movie. It's, oh, I have this idea, I should write it. And that writing the stories out helps with my level of focus, concentration, anxiety. I get to take these stories and let these characters come to life. And then I get to kind of plan something and I get to see it through and I get to meet those little miniature goals. And those meeting those miniature goals gives me a sense of accomplishment, which makes me happy and keeps me out of
Right.
that darkness of, oh, I'm not doing anything today. I'm not achieving the goals I want to achieve. Well, if I write or I come up with a brainstorm or I come up with something to affect the books, the stories, then I'm accomplishing something each day.
Absolutely. And speaking, as you just mentioned, going self-published, let's actually talk about now the business side of being an author. Now, as you said in your bio and just now that you are a self-published author, now I'm curious, was self-publishing the initial plan from the get-go, or was it after through researching which path seemed best for you, whether going independent publishing or trying your hand at traditional publishing? So can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, so in the initial response, when I was thinking about publishing these short stories, it was, I don't have a ton of money to pay somebody to go do this. And I kind of was researching Amazon and Kindle and how they do it and the accessibility and the ease of it. I was reading through all the discussion forums and it seemed really easy. And I was just looking for something, like I said, I was just looking for something to kind of fill my time because I was getting kind of tired just sitting around the house during COVID.
Right.
Um, and so it just seemed like such an easy option, something just fun to do. And so it was like I wrote a story and I have a tendency to rush things because I get anxious about finishing them. So sometimes I won't like pull it back and look at it again. And I know I've debated taking those initial short stories off and redoing them and then republishing them. But it was just so easy. It was so quick. It was like,
Yes.
just why not just do this? So then when I finally decided to do whiskey glasses, my wife and I had talked about, looking for publishing and seeking a representative and stuff. And I actually just started listening to what other authors were saying on Instagram,
Got it.
people who have been published or people who were seeking publication or people looking for PR companies or marketing companies versus those who are just grinding.
Right.
Um, and a friend of mine who was on your show, Dana Brenson,
Yes.
we're old friends. She used to work with my wife. I know her husband used to work with me. So, we have a real strong personal connection. My wife always says that we're actually the same personality. We're very strong-willed people. And I talked to her about her journey with her PR people and her marketing. And and then I've talked to some other friends who went with the traditional route of publication and the creative control. If this is my story, if these are my characters, I don't want someone dictating and telling me, oh, you have to write 20 more thousand words. The
Mm-hmm.
story's done. The story took itself.
Yeah.
I can't determine. I can plan all I want. When I planned the story that's coming out next, I had planned for 38 chapters and close to 70,000 words. I usually try to keep between 50 and 70. And all of a sudden, the characters just took the book. They went, did their own thing. And I'm just writing, just following them. Okay, this is what's happening. I have
Definitely.
no control. And all of a sudden, the story ends. And I'm like, I'm at 50,000 words, 34 chapters. Okay, sounds good. Like, okay, we'll get finished. Let's start wrapping this one up and let's move on to the next one. And I don't want someone telling me how to be creative, how I should write.
Right.
Um, I'd rather make it myself, own it, control it. This is my destiny. This is probably one of the only things in my life that I feel I have really ever truly focused on for myself. and been selfish about. Even though it's
Hmm.
strange, I'm writing these books primarily for my wife. They're still my books, and I want them done how I want them done. And that's the most original part of me is I don't want somebody else telling me how to be creative.
Right. Definitely. And kind of going back to what you said about, in the beginning, how you were writing this book for yourself and also for your wife, who especially loves Westerns and romance, that now turns to the audience because it is very important to understand who the audience is for your book. Now, for you in particular, Jesse, with Whiskey Glasses, do you have a good idea of who your audience is from your experience writing short stories, which were for different audiences? And also, in your opinion, how important is it for an author to really understand who their audience is before they begin writing their book?
I think so. To start with that last one first, I think it's important for you to know where you're going with your book and then how to find your market. Um, I have a couple friends that we've been talking about who are getting ready to launch their books, and their page, their algorithm is set one way, but their book isn't set on that same
Right.
algorithm. It's hard. I experienced that when I first started because of the books I was reading and the books I was reading with my wife. My algorithm was kind of skewed. So I'm
Hmm.
having to go out and find the right things that match the aesthetic and the connection um, to whiskey glasses. And so I do know the people who are looking, but going back to that first, I do feel like I know the people who I'm trying to find. There are those who are a little bit on the hopeless romantic. They enjoy 90s rom-coms, they enjoy sweet stories with characters who have depth. They don't mind a little bit of spice in their
Right.
stories. They're not um, they're very low spice. They're not very, I wouldn't say there's nothing in them. There's something in them, but
Right.
they're not in the smut realm. They and so and there's nothing wrong with that. They're just I'm not writing that for this. You know, my audience is ironically enough, my audience, other than my wife and myself, is my mother and my mother-in-law. Someone
Okay.
who can someone who's read stories from the past, like Danielle
Right.
Steele, Nora Roberts, these older, that are it's a little more wholesome. It's
Right.
uh not so 2024 from
Hmm.
to be honest. And so one of the greatest achievements, and this kind of talks about why I say my mother and my mother-in-law, is my mother-in-law. I wrote some fantasy books, and they just weren't for her. My stepfather-in-law read them, and he loved them. Um, but when I wrote this book, I was kind of talking about it at a family event. She goes, "Oh, that's a book I'd love to read," and I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so when it came out for ARC reading, I was like, "Let me send you a copy and read it." And chick loved it. She fell in love with it. That was like huge for my mother-in-law to like love something that I created. Like
Right.
that was a pivotal moment for me. And then my mom to be able to read it and be like, "This is amazing." And my mom, she's always supportive. She's my mom. Of course, she's gonna say she loves it, but it's it was a lot different from my mom saying she loved it to my mother-in-law saying she loved it. I'm used to my
Hmm.
mom telling me she loves my stuff. My mother-in-law saying it is something I've been with her.
Nice. Very, very
So that
good.
kind of hits that level of achievement. But that's what I'm aiming for with my target is people who like that sweet romance, that kindness, those original characters, and potentially a happy ever after.
Okay. All right. You never know.
Yeah.
And that actually kind of leads perfectly into, the next question, which I think is one of many important ones, which is, of course, who are the authors who helped mold us into the storytellers we are? Because we're always inspired by the legends of the past. I mean, the authors that you've mentioned, I'm sure, are like titans of their genre and in their field. But also to add on to that, for us, when we began writing our own stories, yes, we pull inspirations and ideas from the stories that we've enjoyed reading growing up, but we don't want to imitate nor replicate. We want to find our own voice, or rather, establish our own voice in the publishing world. Because I'm sure you'll definitely agree, Jesse, you may have seen, or you probably have seen books that have had the tagline, the next J.K. Rowling, the next George R. Martin, and Tolkien, and so forth. And for the reader who sees that, they get a preconceived notion of what to expect in terms of how the story is going to play out, how the characters are going to be depicted, how the prose is going to be written, and so forth. But for the author, that's not really, in a sense, a good feeling, because we don't want our readers to expect us to write like, people from the past. As one of my guests said a while ago, if we're marketing for a particular audience, they've already read books in this genre or have read a story very similar. It's people who are outside the genre that you really want to hook them in and bring it to.
Yeah.
And that I think is really important. So, as a two-parter, what books would you say have been really influential in the creation of Whiskey Glasses, as well as your own voice as an author? And what are your own thoughts of sort of like the struggle for indie authors and first-time authors to really bring about their authorial voice, so that way readers can get an idea saying, "Hey, this is me. I'm not like this person. I'm not like that person. I am me."
Um, hmm. I don't know if I would compare Whiskey Glasses to another style of writing.
Okay, that's fair.
That comes specifically from, like I was saying, the collaboration of my ideas, my wife's ideas, our life together, what we've kind of gone through together. There's a lot of personal growth from our relationship and our lives and us growing as people from, we've been together since we were teenagers. We got together in my senior year of high school. She had just graduated. So we've spent a lot of time with each other. We've grown a lot with each other. We've had a lot of different experiences. So in being a collaboration with each other, she brings a much heavier book reading background.
Mm,
She is always reading. She's the belle. She's the belle. She's just always got her nose in a book. Um, Myself, like I've always really been into movies, and then what really kicked off my reading desires and stuff like that, what really like sparked it for me was after watching a couple movies, like I'd go and find the book and I'd read the book of the movie, which then spurred further love of that series. So Star Wars, right out of high school, like I went and read all the Star Wars novels, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back,
mm,
Return of the Jedi, I read those. And then I wanted to go further. Phantom Menace had was about, I think was close to being released or was released. I can't remember the year that Phantom Menace was released, but the prequels were coming out,
yes.
and of course they weren't getting the recognition that they're getting now. They weren't appreciated on that same level, and I wanted to learn more about um, further characters. I wanted to read more about Luke and Han,
Okay.
Leia, and Chewie. I wanted the expanded universe.
Mm,
And so I started reading through there, read a lot of Timothy Zahn,
mm-hmm.
loved like Shadows of the Empire
Yes.
um, and Thrawn's story and Mara Jade, and just that universe just kept going and going. And so my brother's a big Star Wars fan, so he was just sending me novels like, oh, read this one, read this one. And then that kind of connected to other movies. I started finding that passion, and I started finding novels that of movies I liked because I wanted to compare. People would always say, "Oh, the book was better." Why? Why is it better? Like
Right.
I'm watching it, and that's amazing. Why is it better for me to read it? And that's when I started to find out. So I was reading like Pet Cemetery, The Shining, Running Man. Fell in love with Stephen King books. Carrie, Christine. Um, and there's still a lot of his I haven't finished. Um, but so like, and then it like all of a sudden got into Harry Potter and comparing the books to the movies, and it really just expanded. Not really like a genre for me. It was more like, what movie have I watched, and I want to read that book.
Right.
It was then comparing them. And that's where my love for reading kind of blossomed. But I'm always looking for something that it has to keep pace and keep moving.
Right.
I've tried, I've read through The Hobbit. I love The Hobbit, but my wife tells me, because she's the biggest understanding person who understands my style of writing, is she says when she reads, it sounds like I'm talking to her.
Ah,
So
okay.
my writing style is very similar to how I talk. Is how she puts it. I don't see it. I feel like it's a completely different voice, but she says every time she reads, she feels like why it's different. It's because she feels like she hears my voice.
Okay. All right. And sort of like the next question, which is terms of readership, because I always feel the readership is important when it comes to the story. Yes, the readership is in the audience, but readership is more fine-tuned. It's actually specifically who is going to read the story. Now, there are some books that are catered to a certain demographic, certain age group, but on other times, some books are marketed to a specific audience when they're not actually that. Case in point, one of my guests, Rick Velasco, wrote a vampire story and the publisher marketed it as a romance fantasy. Needless to say, a lot of people were not happy, which kind of deterred her from ever writing romance fantasy in the future or ever. So, for your book in particular, for Whiskey Glasses, where do you sort of find it in the spectrum of publishing? Do you find it is in the middle where young readers can enjoy it, and new adults and new adults and adults can also enjoy it, or do you feel that it's more young adult or more new adult and adult?
So, um, my niece is a big reader, and she is going to be 15 this year. We started reading Sarah J. Maas's Throat of Glass, kind of buddy reading it. She reads a lot faster than me, so I really had to like pick up pace. I think I was a couple books ahead of her, and she caught up, and so I was like panicking to finish it. But reading through some of that elements, some of the spice level that Moss has in those series, which isn't a lot. Um, my niece was like, "Oh, I had to skip that part. Oh, I had to skip that part. I didn't like that part." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So when I wrote Risky Glasses, and I would get some people say it's like a level 1.5, level 2 peppers,
Right.
spicy. Um, I was like, well, there's a couple chapters that you might want to skip over, because she was like, I want to read it. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, it's a wholesome story. It's got good characters. It's funny. It's not, it's not violent. It's not overly aggressive with wordage. So, but there is a spiciness to it. So I would, in the realm of books, what I've seen when they're marketing YA books, um, it would meet the YA market. But I would feel like it probably shouldn't be read by anyone other than younger than 16, 17. But I mean, what kids are exposed to is, I just went and saw
Yeah.
Deadpool, and there was an 8-year-old little boy behind me, and I was like, can't be that
Yes.
bad. My book's not that bad. Um, but the target audience is probably more adult, because it does deal more with elements of um, past trauma,
Mm,
and dealing with trauma and dealing with emotions that we really don't know how to deal with. And Jameson and Abigail, the main characters in the book, she's 25, he's about 28, 29. So they're hitting that, figuring out who they are as adults. They're still in this generation. They're figuring out that they're not even yet adults. They haven't even hit their 30s yet. They're still
right.
learning who they are. They're still developing who they are. They're still testing things out and figuring it out. And neither of them are rushing. They're still trying to figure out how they fit in this world.
Mm,
So the older adults, us 40-year-olds will be like, oh, wow, those are some very deep, impactful levels. And oh, yeah, I remember that time in my life. And then hopefully people within their mid 20s to mid 30s might identify with some of the feelings and emotions and things you deal with at that stage in your life.
definitely. 100%. And that sort of kind of leads now to the big reflective question, which brace yourself, Jesse. This is a very big one, so I'll lead up to it. So I give this question a lot on my show because I think it is important to really, really understand and fine tune, which is, for first time authors and debuting authors, we all want, the dream where we can live off of our successes. They can be adapted into other medias, whether it's a limited series or a series of movies, and so forth. And ultimately, having and doing these interviews now for about a year and a half, I've come to the conclusion that there are two main paths that authors take. The first path is to be an author, which is an individual dedicated to the art of storytelling, where they're not solely motivated by capital. It's nice, but it's not the sole reason to create stories. The second path is to be known as an author, which is different. That is an individual dedicated to marketing, showcasing their book on every social media platform, building up hype for it, trying to gain a lot of followers, readers, so that way when it does launch, it has all the reviews it needs to be successful. And from those reviews will gain interest and capital, which will lead down to other prospects. Now, either of these paths have their own hurdles, but the one thing I've noticed doing these interviews is that a lot of my guests will agree that a lot of first time authors will definitely choose the second path under the impression that they believe their book is, good. And it possibly could be. There's not what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to say is if you believe that your first book is going to be the start of your legacy as an author, in the point that you can live off of your first book, that's going to be a little more difficult. Now, there are some examples of authors whose first works, like right out of the gate, launch them to award winning status. That is incredible. That is not an easy feat to achieve. But on the other side of the coin, there have been authors who have risen, fell, rise again, and fall down even harder. And that comes down to what were your long term goals with this project? Did you want to get rich quick? Did you want to see who would notice your book the most? And a whole bunch of other plans that may or may not have been very thought out. And that can deter anyone from pursuing a passion in writing or a career in writing going forward. So, for you, Jesse, in your own opinion and from your own experiences, how important is it for first time authors, debuting authors, or any authors, whether they go independent or traditional, really understand this concept that just because you've written a first book, it does not guarantee the start of your legacy, but it should not deter you from writing and creating more stories if that is something you're truly passionate about?
I completely agree with the statement that it is very, I call it what I refer to it as is if someone launches one book and it launches a career for them, they have the cheat codes. You know, they're that friend when you sat down and played a video game with them, they knew the cheat code. They could win every time. They're just that good. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, the universe has aligned it that way. And I hold no ill will towards them. I'm happy for them. And if I launch a book at some point in my career and it takes off, then the universe lined up for me. And I apparently found the cheat code. Um, I realized that, and this is part of my journey, in my intrinsic journey with writing, is this is something that I am myself passionate about. This is something that I love to do, not only for the fact that I'm putting something out there into the world that people might read and like and share, but this is healing for me. So I definitely take the approach of if this is if this takes off and is a legendary story for me, that's fantastic.
Right.
Like, but that's not the goal. The
Mm-hmm.
goal is not, this is not the career. Like, if this doesn't work, then everything is over. That's not the mindset at all. The mindset is to create put it out there. Maybe someone reads it. If nobody reads it, my family likes it. I like it, and it's being okay with me. And I've seen some authors who have stacks of stories, and they're like, "Oh, I've written these many books," and I'm like, "But are you happy with it? Are
Right.
you happy with it? You can punch out 20 books. Are you happy with the quality? Are you happy with the story? Are you happy with what you did?"
Mm-hmm.
And so for new authors coming in, people that I've befriended on Instagram and starting to arc read for them, um, I am trying to do similar to what you are doing, similar to what other book writers are doing. And it's spotlighting other authors and being like,
Right.
hey, we see you, we hear you, you know, you've got people who support you, hold strong. Maybe something will happen, but if something doesn't, at least you've made some friends. You've had, you know, maybe you can gather something from this experience. But there's no, I'm not delusional.
Right.
You know, I know how hard it is for to be a successful author. I know what the price is per book.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not
Definitely.
like what you sell, even if you're selling a hardback book at a full rate cost, you're what charging $40 per book? Like even if it's like a big book, $40, but how much does it cost you to promote it, produce it, put it out? Like what's the return? So it's like
Right.
I I can't jump into this and be like, this is gonna be my success story. This is my therapy.
Mm. Got it. And ultimately, to add to that, grit and perseverance turns into talent because we get better as time goes on with our storytelling. And
Yeah.
from that point on, it may be our seventh or 10th or 20th book that really gets our name out there for the masses. And that will probably be the one book we're known for. I mean, let's look at like movies, as you were talking about movies. Actors like Sylvester Stallone. He's done a lot of other movies, but what two characters is he always going to be remembered for? Rocky
Rocky.
Balboa and John Rambo. And those are
Yeah.
iconic because of how they've been immortalized in the world that they belong to. Same thing with books. As time goes on, you know, books will gain new readers, and it may be a new set of readers who will see books 19 to 1, where they can now see, oh my gosh, look at this guy's progression. And going back
Mhm.
to what you said earlier about, connections, friends along the way, that I think is also very beautiful about the independent community, especially on social media and Instagram in particular. I've met so many wonderful authors on that platform. Heck, a majority of my guests for this year alone have been from Instagram. It's crazy and ridiculous. And I've learned so much from them. They've given me some great tips and tricks about the business. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning about the industry because it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, finding out, okay, what genre is going to be the most dominant in the industry. Spoiler, it's romance fantasy. It's read more times than any other
Yeah.
book or any other genre in the field. It's read 6 times a month as opposed to 6 books in 6 months from any other genre. It's ridiculous. And that's an entirely another discussion for another time.
Yeah.
But going back to what I was saying about connections are very important, especially for an independent author when it comes to finding good editors, finding good cover artists, learning when to release the book at a particular time. That's also very huge in the business. So for you, Jesse, besides friends and family, are there any authors you like to give shout outs to who have really helped you understand the business better than when you started out all those years ago?
Yeah, someone who really has actually guided me quite a bit. And she just popped up in, I don't know if it was just like a happenstance of follow, but Whitney Stanfield, she released her book, A Sea of Songs and Sirens.
Hmm.
Um, she released it pretty much right around the same time that Whiskey Glasses launched, but her aesthetics on her page and everything that she was doing was very intriguing. And she had made this post, and she said, you know, if you want any advice or any help, you know, send me a message. So I said, hey, look at my page. Tell me what you think. And she said, she's like, I think you need to focus a little more on your aesthetics. I think you're a little bit all over the place. And I was like, that's kind of how I am. So that makes sense. And I was like, okay, what should I do? She goes, well, you know, your colors are kind of this and they're kind of this. So kind of try to keep things in that, you know, try it for 30 days, see what happens. And I said, okay. And so we did that, and I started to see a little bit better response. And then I had asked her how her book was doing since it released at the same time that mine did. And she's like, oh, I've got this many. And I'm like, okay, she's got some cheat codes. Like she's kind of figured something out that I don't know. And I said, what should I do? And she's like, build a street team. And I said, what? I didn't know what she meant. She goes, street team, people to help you out through the process. And I'm like, well, I kind of have that. You know, I've got my wife, my editor. She goes, no, build a team. And so I actually just launched my team that's assisting me with the next book in this series. I've got 12 team members plus my wife on my team. So Whitney Stanfield has been amazingly helpful. I mentioned Dana earlier.
Yes.
You know, her book Latent Charm, when she released that, her new one, Providence of Power,
Yes.
not Providence, Provenance of Power, is coming out. You know, she's really good because we're very similar personalities. She's always good at really kicking me in the butt and telling me to go forward. But she's also really good at like I think she understands that my imposter syndrome when it comes in, and I have a
Right.
hard time like, oh, I really don't want to do this. And she's like, just do it, it's awesome. And I'm like, yeah, but I really don't want to. She's like, just do it, it looks good. And I'm like, okay. And like coming on to do an interview, I was like, I don't know if I want to do an interview. And she's like, do it. I
Right.
was like, okay. Like she's that one who will push me through the door. So she's very inspirational. And then of course there's some bookstagrammers who are amazing, who've been really inspirational to me, telling me they like my work. But another author who's been great, super supportive for me for Instagram. I share her work, she shares mine, is Diane David. She wrote My Lady, which I think she said came out like in April. But Diane wrote the book like 25 years ago before like
Mm,
Amazon, and then tabled it, and so her story is pretty cool. So like she got inspired to finally publish it, and it's a medieval romance story. Um, so she's really cool. She's really nice, and so those three together as writers have really helped kind of like give me a little more sense of accomplishment in myself and make me
right.
feel like I'm not alone.
Absolutely. You know, I 100% agree because we're all going through the same hurdles. We're all going through the same trials and tribulation. I know everyone will think that, you know, in this business, it is a cutthroat industry. Some may agree with that, others may not. But for me, in my experience, I'm sure it's the same for yours, is that everyone's been super helpful,
Mhm.
super supportive because we're all in the same boat, as I said. We all want to be there for each other's successes because at the end of the day, we're all trying to get our stories out there, and we're going to learn from whoever and whatever way we can. Either it's by Instagram, meeting people virtually, meeting people at conventions who are tabling, no matter what. And we learn from them. And from these pearls of wisdom, we only get better. And speaking
Mhm.
of pearls of wisdom, we arrive at the final question of this interview. So for you, Jesse, with everything you've learned and still learning about the industry with your short stories and, of course, whiskey glasses, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors out there watching or listening to this interview right now?
The main thing is don't give up on yourself. You can give up on a book. That's okay. But don't give up on yourself. Maybe that idea isn't working for you. Like I said earlier, you might get 10,000 words in, it just doesn't flow anymore. That's okay. It's okay that that story has stopped. Maybe it's meant to be a short story, but don't give up on you yourself, the author. Don't think that you're not good enough. Um, we can always get better. We can always learn. If you have a story to tell, tell the story. Find your medium. Find the way that's best for you.
Right.
Um, and your story should be heard, should be
Mm-hmm.
told. Let it out. Because even if you think, and I've heard it before, even if you think your story has been told, it hasn't been told by you. I'm sure there's a little bit of different seasoning. Everyone can make a hamburger, right?
Right.
But how you make a hamburger is going to differ in what you do differently. Know, and you had said it earlier, Gabriel, know what your audience is looking for,
Mm-hmm.
but also know your audience, know who you're going after. Um, and then, which I struggle with, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. Try not to compare yourself to others. This is about your own journey. This is about your experience. Enjoy what you can.
Right.
Um, I'm 5'9". My brother's 6'2". He's better at certain things than I am. I can't compare myself to someone who's 6'2" and outweighs me by 50 pounds. He's a bigger guy. But he's also an artist and he does all these other things that I don't possess. But
Right.
he's not a writer. So I try not to compare his success to my success. I can't compare my success to J.K. Rowling or Sarah J. Maas or any one of those big writers. I have to compare myself to myself. My reflection is what I compare myself to.
Perfectly said, Jesse. Perfectly stated. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another author interview here on the channel. Again, a huge thank you to Mr. Jesse Dean for coming on the show and telling us all about his story, Whiskey Glasses, and for just telling us his story. Jesse, thank you so very much. Before we end, where can people find and engage with you on social media, and where can people go and find your book, Whiskey Glasses, to purchase?
So I am only on Instagram. That's the only social media thing that I'm on. My tag is Jesse Dean Author. So Jesse, no I. But I'm not really big on social media. I do have a link tree page, which is in my bio on Instagram, and I have my website. So I have the link over to Amazon, where you can find whiskey glasses. I realized after naming the book Whiskey Glasses, when you search it up on Amazon, you get a lot of whiskey glasses that come up for
Oh,
whiskey
the actual. Okay.
glasses.
I get it.
Yeah, so easiest way to find whiskey glasses is to search my Instagram, Jesse Dean Author. Go to my link, which will take you to my link tree, and if you click the Amazon, it'll take you right to the book. And I believe the KU, the UK version and the AU version are also linked over on that platform. I'm finding out I have a lot of fans in the UK and the AU who like cowboys.
Nice, nice. I'll link that all down below in the description of this video. Thank you all so very much for joining us for another author interview here on the channel. And don't forget, if you like to get this custom print of my upcoming book, Michael, Last Angel of Earth, all you have to do is pre-order a copy of Michael and then DM me with a proof of purchase as well as an email so I can send the file over to you for you to have. If you want this e-signed, I can easily do that. And if you would like to read an advanced copy before the book releases next month, I will also be providing the link to my ARC application down below. So, thank you everyone for joining us for another author interview. As I said before, a huge thank you to Jesse for coming on the show and telling us all about his story, Whiskey Glasses. We wish him the very best success going forward and his other projects that he has in the works. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day.